You're listening to Death of the Reader. Flex and Herds here with your Murder Mystery World Tour on 2SER, and we are continuing our journey into interactive fiction with our second week on Jordan Mechner's The Last Express. We spoke a lot last week about the history behind this game and how I catastrophically failed, died in Vienna.
Yeah, it took you a couple of tries to actually get through Vienna, which, look, I appreciate that. It's a difficult stretch of the game.
That's not how you made it sound when we were going through. You just sounded like I was a rank fool.
Look, I'm trying to be kinder to you this week because you did get to the end. You did figure everything out, and you almost fumbled your way through the final puzzle of the game without any of the hints that you're supposed to pick up through the game as you go. Because the big set piece of this game, the big artifact that you're supposed to be tinkering with bit by bit as you kind of go through the game is this egg, this golden egg that everyone on the train seems to want for one reason or another. And you read fairy tales about it. It's the Firebird from Russian folklore. And there's this poem that teaches you how to open it and how to mess around with it. And Flex, I don't think you even touched the egg. You got it. You had it in your possession. You put it in a box somewhere and you just didn't think about it. You were like, forget it.
That's right. That's what I do with all my problems.
The egg. Yeah, but it's fine. You basically stumbled through the solution at the end, but you made it. That's the important thing. We made it all the way to Constantinople and saw the ending to this story, which is explosively climactic.
It is.
But also quite somber.
Yeah, so essentially what happens is that the arms deal goes ahead. The Serbian rebels get their guns on the train.
Well, the arms deal doesn't technically go through. The last time we see the German industrialist who's supposed to be selling those arms, he's like, "What are you doing, stealing my guns and also taking the gold with you?" So the arms deal doesn't go through, but the Serbians do hijack the train with the guns on it.
What is an arms deal without a good bit of double crossing and lack of payment?
Right? Yeah. well, this is the thing, right? This is where this entire game comes from. So the kind of broad strokes of the plot is that the Serbians decide, well, now that the guns haven't been taken off the train, we're going to take them by force because we don't trust this American, this German hold up their end of the bargain. We suspect there might be an Austrian spy on the train, which there totally is. The love interest of the story, Anna Wolf, is a spy, and
interest in sizable quotations.
We'll talk about that, but it all leads to you getting chased through the Balkans, basically on the train line, and facing off with the Serbian terrorists because they're much more well armed and capable than you are, and you end up in Constantinople for one final showdown with Kronos, the guy who wants the egg. I guess it ends with World War I kicking off. It's really how the story. That's the note that it kind of ends on after you outwit Kronos and uncover the fact that the egg is, in fact, quite a dangerous thing to have with a person.
I think the overwhelming feeling that I got getting to the end of the story is that it felt extremely flat, but also that it wanted to be.
Yeah.
The very somber, there is no resolution feeling of the futility of war in the intro to World War I.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the entire story is about, powerlessness and, because the situation you're put in is that you are hunted by the feds. You are assuming another person's identity. There's a bunch of deals going on that you don't understand what any of them mean and how to figure things out, and you're in a really bad situation. But so are all the other characters on the train to different degrees, right? The workers on the train are worried that their train line is going to get shut down. There's that lesbian couple who are like, maybe we should just settle down with some boys because that's what's expected of us. The Serbians want to protect their country. There's an interview in the strategy guide that I'm holding in my hands right now that talks about how when Jordan Mechner and Tommy Pierce are lead writers on the project, when they sat down to create the situations of the characters, they didn't want there to be a bad guy.
Yeah.
And even though you could say that Kronos is the bad guy at the end because he's the one who outwit, he just wants his egg. He's not trying to start World War I. He's the only character who isn't trying to start World War I. This is something that Jordan Mechner and Tommy Pierce really put forward. It's about authenticity, and it's about sort of portraying the feeling of the world at the time. There's so many characters who are in bad situations but are hoping for better, and then World War I comes around and just smashes all of those plans. Anna Wolf in the quotations romance in the story even says I would love to run away with you, and Cath says, it's fine. What are the chances that the Austria-Hungary royalty will have use of a spy in the next couple of years? What are the chances of something crazy happening where spies would be incredibly useful? And then World War I happens anyway, right?
I think the interesting thing is that no matter what the emotional thesis of the moment
Yeah.
in The Last Express. There are so many very, very deliberately and cleverly written lines like that, where it is a not subtle hint towards what the story is about, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like it's whacking you over the face with it.
It's not ham-fisted. There are newspaper articles, and one of the best conversations that I don't think I've ever seen the whole conversation of, but it's a conversation between George Abbott, who is a British spy, and August Schmidt, who's a German industrialist who, as I've mentioned, has all those guns on the train, which are going to start World War I if it hadn't already been set in motion.
Yeah.
Those two characters, they have a conversation together that you're not a part of. They talk about Europe moving forward, and they basically have this like idolized picture in their head of, oh, well, Europe is moving into this properly industrialized age with the train, the silver train that runs along all of Europe. This is a way for us to unite and like see this future where both Germany and Britain can like work together and da-da-da-da-da. And we know, because we live in, the 21st century, that none of what they're saying is going to come to pass.
Yeah.
But there's so many conversations like that just feel like two normal people talk about a dream that will never be.
Yeah, it was really interesting because I was rereading Rebecca Stafford's The Imitator, who we spoke with a few weeks ago on the show.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting hearing that discussion in parallel with this, because there's very similar ideals, I guess, that were going into both world wars of the possibility of unity, but also the sheer mounting circumstance that never could let that be. I think the other thing that was really great about Abbott this time is one of the best conversations in the entire game is when you sit down with him talking about how you've stopped Alexei and how his plans have been put aside because you found the clock that he was going to use to make an explosive to blow up the train.
Yep.
And then Abbott asks you, did you find the dynamite?
Yeah. And Cath says, what dynamite?
And the train blows up.
It's one of my favorite moments in the entire game because like the lead into that scene is that you find Alexei dead because a supernatural dream tells you that he's being killed by Count Obolensky, which is a whole other side of the plot that we need to get into. But like you know that Alexei is being killed, so you go and you see him, and he's like, the clock, and then he dies. But he comes up to Cath and says, let's go have a drink, and it's a total trap. Because you can hear, even during that conversation, a ticking sound. And so Alexei saying the clock is a reference to the fact that he's taken the clock from the smoking car, which is where George Abbott tells you to go have a drink with him, and he's made a new timer. It's one of my favorite little puzzles in the game, the way that it all comes together. And when you're actually like trying to figure out where the bomb is, you can hear the ticking getting louder and softer depending how close you are. And in that scene where the train blows up, you can see which car is getting detonated. Like there's so many little details. And that's really the biggest praise I can give to this game, right?
The other thing that's really nice about that particular sequence is that all of the things that it does are just a natural part of the story. It's not like they're being incredibly clever and saying, we'll use this camera angle to show you where the bomb is. So they blow up the correct car. And if you're paying attention, the details are there. Together. Be accurate to what is happening in the story and trust that the audience will follow it.
Yeah, the game doesn't use a lot of storytelling tricks, I suppose. Nothing that seems out of place, at least. There are a couple of things that I think are particularly noteworthy, like the diary entries. There's a difference between whether Cath on the trip from Munich to Vienna is taken off the train by himself, or if he's taken off the train with the Serbian terrorists, because obviously if the Serbians aren't on the train, they can't hijack it. And the diary entry that you get as like an epilogue to those two stories is slightly different.
The other thing that's really fun there is that because a lot of the diary entries are intentionally vague, it motivates you to keep trying to find more of them and piece together which one is which. For example, when you get taken off the train, it says something along the lines of the worst was yet to come. And we still don't necessarily know whether that means the bomb, the hijacking, or both.
Yeah, it's all kind of like there are a lot of things in the game that are deliberately vague and a lot of conversations that don't line up one-to-one. And I think that it still feels cohesive as a story, but that lack of like 1 + 1 = 2 in the way the conversation is laid out and the way that you can kind of gather clues, I think lends itself well to the kind of storytelling. Like, I mean, that's obvious just if you played the game. Critus is the weirdest character on the train, but like he is a character who is sort of portrayed as being both a man of means, but also it's sort of implicated that he has some supernatural powers, sort of as you move through the story. That also is supported by the weird supernatural dreams that your character has that are implied to be shared with Anna Wolf, the other like main character on the train. they have like dreams where they see each other in a tower. And it's again just
and that's like a reference to an amulet or a necklace that
it's a ring.
That's right.
Robert Cath has a ring on his finger that Anna Wolf believes is a family crest. And Kronos, in one of the bad endings, which we actually got on the stream that we did, one of the bad endings, Kronos says that when you go to Jerusalem, Cath, you should ask about the 13th tribe. Which is a reference to the 12 tribes of the Hebrew people.
And I gather that was going to be the follow-up game to The Last Express that we never got.
That's the expectation, yeah. The next game will be set in Jerusalem. Yeah, like that's the last thing I want to kind of leave you with for my thoughts on like why this is fantastic. It just, there's so much attention to detail and everything fits together perfectly.
Yeah.
Except for the parts that don't. We'll talk about that. We'll talk a bit more about our negative feelings, I think, next part. But, like, go play it.
Alrighty.
Go play it.
You're listening to Death of the Reader. Flex and Herds here. We are discussing Jordan Mechner's The Last Express. And we'll be back with more of that in just a second.
You're listening to Death of the Reader. This is Flex and Herds, and today on our Murder Mystery Show, we are joined by veteran actor and hairstylist Mr. Karl-Heinz Teuber, known for making their debut appearance as a flamboyant wig salesman in Amadeus more than 35 years ago. He endeared himself to us as a star of The Last Express as Herr August Schmidt. Karl, welcome to the show.
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. I'm so happy that you found me after so many years, here, and I'm sitting here in San Francisco, and later on I can show you with my camera, I can show you America. I can show you the fabulous Golden Gate Bridge. I have a fabulous view in my apartment.
That'll be excellent.
I'm looking forward to it, honestly. So, Karl, you've come to us, as you say, after 35 years of acting, parts big and small, but I want to know what you remember most fondly from the days of filming your German industrialist character and, I would say, sweetheart, August Schmidt.
Sweetheart sounds good. August Schmidt was hired with my German accent, as you know, to be an loves the Kaiser and plays a weapon dealer. It is on The Last Express. You probably did some research already how they did The Last Express. And they found this old car, photographed this all, and later on we filmed everything in front of a green screen. So, but going back to good old August Schmidt, you have seen my photo.
Yeah, we have, and we will have that picture up at Flex and Herds on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter if you want to check it out yourself.
They made me very fat looking, and the makeup and things like this took quite a while, and then you have seen the photo, and then later on they animated everything, and I had fun with it. I remember so many things. They picked me up and brought me back on a big warehouse. I think we filmed it there. There was a big screen, and there were such seats where we could sit on. You remember my little dance scene I have in there?
The best scene in the show. Yep.
Yeah, mm-hmm. And this little dance scene, they said something on the set. This was very funny. You have to dance together now. And I said, okay, fine. Music. And I said, I remember something my father always liked to sing. Ach, Mutter, der Max, hat Beine wie Wachs. Daddy, that I didn't know the text anymore. And I just think, and I did not know where the music came from. I just remembered this scene, and later on I saw it was done in 7 different languages. Different people spoke my character, my part, and sang it in Russian and in Japanese and in God knows what. This was amazing for me to see.
Well, I've seen on your YouTube channel you've actually compiled all of the scenes from The Last Express with August Schmidt involved. And you, as we know, you play this oblivious and sometimes even charmless man whose best moments for the player, on the computer, they're often found off the beaten path. And in the game, our detective is only able to actually see the final confrontation with Schmidt, some of the best scenes you did, if they find all of the clues and put everything together before the grand finale. How do you feel, Karl, about the idea that some people who played the game maybe not have seen your best moments in the story. They may not even have seen the dance scene.
Bad for them, good for me. Many people have seen it, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen on your YouTube channel, I've looked through some of the videos, and I've noticed that some people respond in the comments saying, "Oh, that's Herr Schmidt. I recognize them." I don't know, I guess, how do you feel about that? The idea that even after so many years, people still recognize you from that part from so long ago.
This is a nice feeling. It's a flattering feeling, you know. But this is a job. You did a creative job. And for a moment, for weeks, months, days, you just go in this zone in there. Suddenly, it goes so automatically for me.
Now, I have to ask you, since then, you've been in, countless other pictures, and a lot of them seem to revolve around death and murder and such. You're such an energetic, lively, fun person. Why are you drawn to these roles that are so often involved with murder? Why is that something you're drawn to?
I'm a character actor, and I play men and women and good guys and bad guys. And what else do I play? Everything, Yeah. Drama and comedy, whatever it is. Yeah. It's just happened. It was for 35 years a great experience. Now I'm 84 and I am just doing here at home to my clients and stopped the whole acting thing.
What was your process for getting into character? Did it just happen on a dime, or did you have a particular ritual that you used for each character to help get into that performance?
Yes, good question. When I get a script, I read the script many times through, and then just the character, whatever it is, how do I play this? Go and do research on the computer about this character. If this is a fictional character, I put my own feeling into it and hope this will be the best, If the director says, no, I want to have it more this way or this way, sure, you follow the director, So, but it comes so automatically for me deep inside. It is just there, It's like it has to really come from the deep inside from you. That, like, there's a painters, they like to paint, musicians, they want to sing, and all creative people want to do it. It comes from the deep inside.
Thank you very much for joining us, Karl. This has been Karl-Heinz Teuber, prestigious actor, hairstylist, and ageless spirit of Europe. You're listening to Death of the Reader. Thank you for joining us, Karl.
Thank you, man. It was a pleasure. I never did this before. An interview on Skype in Australia,
And it was our pleasure, Karl. If you want to see those pictures we mentioned earlier, they will be up, as I said, on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Flex and Herds. We are discussing The Last Express by Jordan Mechner, which starred Karl-Heinz Teuber right there. And we'll be back with more of that in just a second. You're listening to Death of the Reader. Flex and Herds here. We are discussing Jordan Mechner's The Last Express from surviving Vienna through to the end of the game. And it's time to talk about the puzzles and what we enjoyed, disliked, the actual structure of the mystery and what it put together. We were talking a lot in the earlier part about kind of the themes of industrialization and the way that underlies the story in the lead into World War I. And I think we'll kind of wrap up today talking a little bit about some symbolism and how that ties those themes together. But the thing I wanted to get into right up front is the nitty-gritty, the mystery, the puzzles, the technical bits of it. So as I mentioned last week on the show and on the streams that we've been doing, I've played a lot of like Rem, Myst, and other, point-and-click adventure games of this era to train myself to be ready for The Last Express. Sure. And the thing that was really interesting to me about The Last Express and the way that it did its mechanical puzzles, especially the bomb, is that it gave you a puzzle that you had to kind of trial and error, but also there was a fail state for trialing, which was really interesting to me. Because when I look at, for example, Myst, less so Rem, one of the things that's interesting with those puzzle designs is that if there is a switch, you pull it. That's just one of the things that happens in those games.
Just to see what it does.
Yeah. And normally in those games, once you've pulled it, it will either be very clear when you have to disengage it, or you won't have to disengage it at all. So for example, one of the standard examples in a lot of those games is that you have to turn the power on. That's a standard thing that has to be done, and you just turn a switch and presumably the power is on and you either can't undo it or you won't have to for the entire rest of the game. But when we get to things like the bomb, when we get to things like going in and outside of the train cars, there's a lot of stuff where because it has these adventure game dead ends, bad ends, you're kind of punished for trial and error, but at the same time, the punishment is designed to be enjoyable in a way.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing about the bomb puzzle, isn't it? That if you pull it, do the equivalent of pulling a switch or pushing a dial, you just die. And I think in my mind, there are really only two puzzles that I don't particularly like. The bomb puzzle is one just because you die.
Specifically the mechanical part of the bomb puzzle, the lead up, as we were saying last part.
Finding the bomb is great. The moment because when you find the bomb, it does a little musical sting. It's like, duh, like you found the bomb. Good luck solving it, nerd. Disarming the bomb is not super fun. The other puzzle that it's not a big deal because you don't even have to do it, but there's a bug you have to catch on a table, and it's literally just you click on the matchbox and you click on the bug, and that's the puzzle. Like, you did it. But apart from that, the puzzles are generally pretty good because they're focused on like figuring out the characters and what they want and need.
Yeah.
Which is a much more nuanced way of doing puzzles, especially for the year when this game was actually produced.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that was interesting to me was that I suffered a lot with some of the simpler puzzles, like figuring how to get in and out of people's rooms, because as I mentioned...
I mean, the big one was actually when you were trying to figure out how to get out of Kronos' room with the bag of gold.
Yeah.
Because what you have to do is just walk through the main room of Kronos's
there's a concert going on. Yeah. Everyone is there. You are meant to take the gold and walk out in full view of everyone.
The reasoning is that it's the masquerade. If Kronos says something like, "Hey, what are you doing with my bag of gold there?"
The jig is up.
Then the jig is up. The masquerade is gone, and Kronos's mystique, which he works so hard to cultivate, would be gone. But when we played through that section, basically what happened is that you had entered Kronos' sanctum technically just after the concert is supposed to end.
Yeah.
So somebody kept coming in being like, oh, the concert's ended.
Yeah.
So we
I thought
play
that
the
was
script where you get caught.
I thought that was punishment for me clicking on the door. So I avoided doing it for a good 10 minutes.
It was a bit of a mess.
And it's kind of interesting. And I mean, a lot of adventure games like this have issues like this where it'll give you a clue, you'll misinterpret it, and then you'll just be stuck there until you do something that you thought was obviously wrong. And those moments are really frustrating. That's inherent in the genre, and I think that The Last Express does better than a few of the ones that I've played, but it still doesn't miss
it's not perfect.
The failure.
The rewind mechanic, as I've always said, is the best way of mitigating this. Because in most puzzle games like this, you'd be like, I'm going to save the game, and then I'm going to run over the other side of the island, then I'm going to try this thing, and then I'm going to run over here and pull these levers. But with The Last Express, the game always knows how far you can go back in order to salvage your situation.
Yeah, but then when we get into talking about the social puzzles, the idea of the masquerade, like the Kronos' role in the story, it gets so much more interesting. And I think that... it makes me torn because on the one hand, I would love to play through this game and figure it out for myself and get the whole way through. But on the other hand, because of how clearly it played to my weaknesses, I would have had a horrible time if you hadn't been kind of there with me.
Yeah. I will say, just we haven't mentioned this yet. You're getting your point for this week because you did solve the murder. But in my mind, when I played this, I don't want to talk about my own experience because I'm pretty sure the first time I played this, I did it with the guide, or at least using bits of the guide because I just had it.
Yeah.
But when I played it through with my good friend of the show, Mr. Fallon, he did not even consider that the Firebird was a living, breathing automaton. Yeah. But as I mentioned, the second that he picked up the egg, he was like, let me see if I can do something with it. And the second that you heard about the Firebird, you were like, oh, that's the thing that killed Tyler Whitney then. Yeah. That's what did it. Whereas when we got to the end of the game with my boy Fallon, he was like, what? The thing comes to life and attacks people? That's crazy. But that's the thing. You guys have completely different strengths and weaknesses. The first thing he tried was grabbing the gold and walking out through the masquerade.
Yeah.
He figured that out instantly. And that's just how different people approach these games. And in a sense, that's the beauty of video games, right?
Totally. So. And I think it's also, if you go back and you do play games like this, if you do play classic adventure games, The Last Express, Myst, Rem, I don't know why those are the only three that come to mind, because I've been playing a bunch of them, but I don't know. The Myst and Rem are the ones that scratch a particular itch for me, where I just have time to like poke and prod at things without much of a plot getting in the way. It's a lot of environmental storytelling. Yeah. But either way, if you go back and play a lot of these games, it's really good to play through with friends, because the diversity of approach that you will have in tackling them will make it so much more engaging than just staring at the brick wall that is your own misunderstanding.
There are some interesting notes in the guide I have here. There was an interview conducted by a Rick Barber with Tommy Pierce and Jordan Mechner that he asked them about the influences on the game.
Yeah.
And the influences are fairly obvious, and you can find, all the different influences fairly easily. But what I think is interesting is reading, first off, Barber asks, where did you go to for inspiration for the story? And Mechner says, we stole from everything, which is just fantastic.
Yes, good artists copy, great artists steal.
But the interesting note to me is that Pierce says that she reads stuff like Russian fairy tales and Irish poetry and the stories of Rebecca West.
There's a book of Irish poetry from the era of the Troubles on the bookshelf to your left there, Herds.
She's probably read it. Mm-hmm. Autobiographies of philosophers. This is Tommy Pierce's influence.
Yeah.
But then Jordan Mechner is like Casablanca, spy novels, European comic books. This story, I think, does so well because it has those two sides to it. It has the very human, action-focused, political intrigue, World War I side, but then it also has the Firebird and Kronos and the supernatural stuff.
Well, I think that's one of the best parts of storytelling, both collaborative storytelling and individuals with a variety of tastes, is that you're able to pull the volume of your interests into one product. A lot of the time, it comes down to these executions. So that's why I think it's so useful for Robert Cath to have these kind of spiritual dream sequence moments, because it ties in the spiritual side of the story with the investigative spycraft side.
It's why when you come to the ending and you have the big reveal that the Firebird is not just a fancy gold egg, it's not just a mechanical bird creature that can sing. It also has a living, beating heart encased within its mechanical automaton form. That moment of tying together the intensely human heart with the ephemeral spiritual fairy tale Firebird and the cold hard casing of a creature of steel, all of those elements coming together in that form is the perfect place to leave the story.
Yeah, especially with the kind of thoughts of industrialization and the people chewed up by
That's one thing that is kind of interesting. I'm looking at the interview again at the end of the strategy guide here. Mechner is talking about the idea of clues in the story about Chekhov's gun, the Chekhov's gun rule, right? That if somebody mentions their birthday in an adventure game, it's going to be the combination to a safe. And if there's a gun, it has to go off. Mechner basically just outlines that when they sat down to make The Last Express, they deliberately wanted to break that rule, make it so that most details in the game that you come across that you think might be clues are not clues. They're just part of people's lives. And Mechner believes, at least according to this interview here, maybe his opinion has changed, that it's actually not that hard to beat the game. To figure out the literal steps you need to take to finish the game, there's not that many of them. They're not that hard to do.
I would agree.
But it is the stuff that happens in between those decisions, the conversations and the snooping and the finding of stuff that doesn't need to be found. That's what makes the game sing.
I completely agree. I think also the thing that's worth noting there is that you could argue that he didn't really Chekhov's gun it, but what they did in writing this that was very effective was making it that the things that aren't Chekhov's guns towards the core of the game are still worthy details in their own. You still feel like experiencing them is worthwhile to you.
And it all adds to that feeling of it being a living, breathing train. Which is where we come all the way back to the beginning of our discussion. Not even in this episode, not even last episode, but back when we talked about Last Express, when we were chatting about LA Noire 8 years ago, where the way that this story approaches murder mystery is it makes it a confined space and puts as much detail into that space as it possibly can fit to make it authentic.
Alrighty. Well, thank you for joining us here on Death of the Reader. This has been Jordan Mechner's The Last Express, and I hope you get the chance to experience it or go watch us experience it up online, and I'll have links on the podcast. Next week, Herds, you, sir, are going to be playing through The Return of the Obra Dinn by Lucas Pope. Okay. We're going to be going all the way through to the end once, with the explicit expectation that you will fail.
What if I don't, though? What if I just get everything right? What if I win?
Let's reread The Floating Admiral.
Oh, what a great book. That sounds like a good reward for being good at video games.
Anyway, Obra Dinn next week. Thank you so much for joining us. You're listening to Death of the Reader here on 2SER 107.3.